Okay, I'm gonna be very honest. 2025 has had some particularly interesting things that have happened. Top of which is the fact that, like, everyone has been withdrawing from the dating market. They've been saying that the dating market is shit, and that hasn't been great for both sides. Everyone's giving reasons, talking about how the other side isn't all that great. But while I can try to deal with that one, I have to admit that a new issue did emerge, and I'm not gonna lie, it was a little bit harder for me to try and tackle head on. And it is this idea of decentering men, and this thing that women have been saying throughout this year, where they're like, oh, decenter men, to the point where even the Vogue article that I covered basically got quite some traction because a lot of the people that were supporting what was being said were basically people that are part of the whole decenter men trend. And I would like to get into that whole trend and how it might be affecting women and how it might actually be working more against them than for them, even though I am a guy saying this. But even before I can get into all of that, let me first start with an intro, because where are my manners? I should have given one before all of this. Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is Sir Denver B. This is a shorter, less editing or instrumentally version of the podcast. The last one, actually, before I get back into normal programming with the normal episodes. And also, technically, as far as the day of when I recorded this episode, the last episode of 2025. And yes, I know it's 2026, new year, new me or some shit. But hey, this was the last episode that was recorded in 2025. I'm just telling you that, but either way, it has come out in 2026. And it is covering something that did pick up quite a bit of traction in 2025. And it is more of the idea of decentering men and the fact that young women are opting out of dating and embracing singlehood. Now, this was based on an article that I stumbled across from Vox.com, who decided to post this article on IG. And honestly, I feel like it might be more misleading than it is positive, if anything. I know there's some women that will see it and they're like, oh yes, this is positive, this is exactly what's happening. But at the same time, I'm looking at it as a guy and I'm like, this is very misleading information. But anyways, the title of the article is Young Women Are Opting Out of Dating and Embracing Singlehood, Why 2025 Was the Year of Decentering Men. And it was an article that was done by a woman by the name of Kendall Cunningham. And it speaks about the idea of decentering men and why women are embracing singlehood and alternatives, and why even dating guys apparently is not that great of a thing nowadays because women are collectively choosing to opt out of the dating market. Now, while she has spoken about women choosing to opt out of the dating market, which is something that I've also spoken about, and I agree it is something that's happening for both genders, I just don't like the way she's phrasing it. Also, the idea of decentering men. But before I can give my thoughts on this entire thing, let me just read the article, and it says, and I quote, "The term decentering men has inspired a lot of content on TikTok. Women are posting videos encouraging their female followers to deprioritize finding a mate or giving tips on how they can thrive outside of romantic relationships. For a while now, the phrase divorce him has also become the go-to advice for married women discussing even the smallest relationship issues online. So it wasn't a shock when a Vogue column titled Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing Now instantly blew up. Shantae Joseph's piece highlighted several influencers who were hesitant about posting their partners on social media as having a boyfriend has been considered regressive, even Republican, quote-unquote to some, sometimes resulting in angry comments. It's hard to view these anti-men sentiments as anything but a natural response to a tough dating landscape and a world increasingly influenced by misogynistic far-right politicians and influencers," says Kendall Cunningham. This year, the phrase decentering men has taken over the internet. Women are openly embracing singlehood and choosing to prioritize friendships, careers, hobbies, and themselves, often for the first time without apology. The trend echoes South Korea's 4B movement, which gained renewed attention in the US after Donald Trump's re-election, a timing that may not be coincidental. The Lysistrata-esque boycott asks participants to abstain from 4 social activities with men: marriage, dating, sex, and childbearing, as a rejection of South Korea's patriarchal social structure and rigid beauty standards. At the same time, decentering men connects to broader critiques of the so-called male-centered women and pick-me culture, labels used to describe women whose lives revolve around male validation. Whatever the motivation, one thing is clear: being a single adult woman is no longer treated as a personal failure or a temporary phase. End quote. Okay, Okay, particularly interesting article. Seems very female driven. At least, I know the target audience was probably women. And out of everything that's been said, while I can say that some bits she is right on, like a lot of people choosing to withdraw themselves from the dating market, I do still feel like the approach that's being taken is one that is more destructive as opposed to constructive or even critical. And also, there's some biases there that I'm not a fan of, like the whole bit about the world being led by politicians and influencers that are misogynistic. Because, I don't know, if anything, I feel like they're a lot less misogynistic now than they were before. But anyways, that one's more of a personal opinion. But all that said and done, I'm going to start this off by giving an unpopular opinion, which I will basically spend the rest of the episode trying to explain, because I do feel like this is something that might actually be true. And the unpopular opinion is decenter men, among other trends, is basically femcel culture. For anyone that doesn't understand what femcel is, it is basically the female version of incel. So it is female incel culture, or at the very least is a precursor to female incel culture. Now, the reason I'm saying this is basically something that I'm going to spend most of the episode explaining. So if you think I'm just chatting a bunch of shit, it's entirely up to you, but just let me cook. Maybe you might come around to it by the end of the episode. Now, when you look at the trends like decenter men, they're not exactly something new. I feel like it's a packaging that has happened over time, and it's one of many packagings. And there's a couple of different sets of packagings that have come through online as trends that have basically kind of tried to make men look like the bad guy. And every time it seems as though it's starting to die down, another package comes in, or after it's died down for a bit, someone else comes in with a different trend that's supposed to make men look bad, and all of a sudden it's picked up by a bunch of sad or just hurt women. And normally I could say that maybe I'm wrong about this and they're not sad or hurt, or they've gone through some level of trauma because of a bad guy or one or two bad guys. But the thing is, these same women admit to going through that kind of shit. So I can't say that it's not because they're not hurt. Like, it's not like I'm running away from it, because they're not running away from it either. But, that's kind of besides the point. Essentially, what I see is a lot of different packagings, whether you want to call it trends, whether you want to call it, viral challenges or something that I see women doing, or, basically feeling compelled to do, is basically all in line with this push to kind of create some sort of division or some sort of antagony towards guys. And I've never fully understood why, because, okay, fine, yes, there are a couple of shit guys out here, but it doesn't mean that collectively all of men are wrong. Just the same way, even when I listen to guys from, like incel groups or from like, the red pill community, and they talk about women in a negative way, I'm like, okay, there might be a couple of shit women, but it doesn't mean that all women are shit. And it is something that I say on either side. And I say this, and it's not like I'm trying to pander towards one side or the other, but essentially I'm just giving my side of things because I have seen both good and bad from either side. But the unfortunate reality for a lot of people online, or at least a lot of the people that make this content online, is that they don't seem to pay attention to both sides, and they look at one side as the victim and the other side as the oppressor. Or they look at one side as the victim and the other side as a potential victor of some sort. Or, just someone that's basically trying to, exploit them in some way, shape, or form. And as such, it's like there's this constant push and pull on either side, which I've never fully understood why we can't get past. And you see this quite a bit. And I'll give the examples for the women, because since I mentioned decenter men, and I did say that there were others, think of, for example, man versus bear. That was a challenge, or at least that was basically a trend, or you could even call it a challenge that gave a bad impression of men. It made men kind of seem like the main cause of the negative light that they get. You look at the whole idea of talking about icks and how these very tiny microtransgressions that people don't necessarily do consciously, and a lot of them can be subconscious. Some of them are just a part of your upbringing. Some of them are just typical traits that you have which you can change, are supposedly supposed to be used to, make you turn down someone as a potential mate. You look at the red flag, green flag thing that was going on online for quite a while, and people busy talking about what's a red flag, what's a green flag, and something that was ideally supposed to help you in sifting and filtering out whether someone's a good potential dating option or not was basically turned into this thing where people were just making it seem as though a lot of things that men were doing were bad, and a lot of the stuff that was basically pandering to women, whether positive or negative in the long run, was basically good. And as such, you can see how instances like that kind of do create some level of division, because it just makes men look like bad ideas or bad options, even though sometimes they aren't. All right. Like, even Man vs. Bear, I remember when I was discussing it, I said that the one thing that it was doing was just creating a bunch of mistrust, which didn't necessarily have to be there, because it's not like all men are bad, and it's not like statistically most men are actually bad. And when you look at something like Decenter Men, like, this was something that has very easily gone viral on TikTok, and a lot of people picked it up and they were really into it. But you look at it, most of the women that are pushing you to decenter men, like, they're not even on men's radars. And by men's radars, I mean, they're not the ones being approached by guys. And I know, I'm probably wrong about this. It's just, whenever I look at a lot of the people that are busy talking a lot of shit about men online, it's not like they're the kinds of babes that I would expect a lot of guys to be going for. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of guys go for a bunch of different women, and nuances are there and shit, but a lot of the women that are busy talking about how you should decenter men aren't even on men's radar, or radars, even if you want to put it like that. Because, like, when you look at some babes, like, okay, fine, you can talk about how you need to decenter men and how boyfriends aren't even all that great, but if you're not even attracting the options in the first place, it's basically like you hating from our side of the club, and you can't even get in. Or, as Chris Rock once said in the Oscars, it's like me boycotting Rihanna's panties. I wasn't invited. So, for the most part, you're just coming out here to make a bunch of noise, and you're busy telling women that may be attracting men that they should stop focusing on men, yet you yourself are not attracting men yourself. And I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like that is technically a symptom of incel behavior. And if you think I'm wrong, or if you think I'm just chatting a bunch of shit, swap the genders and see if women won't hop online and say that you are exhibiting behaviors of an incel, or they will tell you that you're just an incel that can't pull babes. Like, this is some shit that I have heard women talking about years ago. Like, I have seen this shit from my earlier years in podcasting, where there's this group of people who will basically come up and say that no, we shouldn't be going for such and such people because of A, B, C, or D. But when you go and you look at the other side, you realize that it's really not as bad as they're saying it. And the issue isn't with them. The issue is with where the information is coming from. And that's exactly why I'm saying this does actually seem like incel behavior. It's just that now that it's being pushed by women, we're not exactly going to call it incel behavior, but since there is a female version of incel, I can probably call it femcel behavior. Now, the other side of it is not necessarily just even in the messaging, it's how the supposed community tends to react whenever you decide to hold an opinion, or you decide to hold a view or an ideal in your life that basically goes against whatever this sort of movement is. And the perfect example of this is the exact same Vogue article that this babe was referring to in her article, of which I did actually cover that story a couple of episodes ago, so maybe you can go check that out and also hear my views on that. But all in all, this is basically more or less the same thing, because typically whenever you look at incel culture, someone who's been a part of like the incel community, if they go and they suddenly have some success with a woman, and they go and they start challenging some of the ideologies and beliefs of the incel community, it's very easy for them to either get kicked out or for them to basically remove themselves, because a lot of those views basically start running completely contradictory to whatever it is that has been said by supposedly said community. And when you look at the Vogue article, it is particularly the same thing. People are busy talking about boyfriends and posting up their partners, and suddenly they're losing followers. Suddenly, there's people that are in their comments and they're angry or not sounding particularly nice. And the thing is, it's not like it's guys that are catching a feeling, it's the women. So are you telling me that this should not be considered some version of incel culture but for women? Because it very easily looks like this is the exact case that's happening. And the honest thing about this is, while it might seem fun right now, I personally believe that it has a shelf life. And I say that it has a shelf life because I've watched what has happened to communities like this that have sowed division. When you look at the incel community, when you look at the red pill community, a lot of them didn't last very long past their peak. And that was mainly because they hit their peaks, then at some point in time, they couldn't hold on to that peak for very long. So they started to drop off, not just in the implosion of the people that are busy talking about stuff like this, but essentially in people finding out that those beliefs don't hold as much water as they thought it did. And so I do believe that this movement does have a shelf life and it will pass eventually. So I'm gonna give it maybe about 3, maybe max 5 years. And this should probably be gone, because honestly, the idea of dissenter men or a lot of the stuff that women are bringing up that is very anti-men nowadays, much as it might seem like it's helping women, I don't think it's going to last very long. The difference between this and the 4B movement, in my opinion, is that this movement of dissentering men is basically against men, of which eventually people will realize that men aren't really the problem. But the 4B movement is actually a war against ideals. It's a war against ideals, and there's a pretty good chance that if you take a South Korean woman out of South Korea and you take her to Europe, or you take her to a different part of the world where she's treated a lot nicer, then there's a pretty good chance that you won't hold on to the 4B movement for particularly long, you know? Although that's just me. And to kind of conclude all of this, what I am trying to say is you can try and dissenter men all you want, but for the most part, it probably won't be forever. And either you're going to learn or you are going to be a part of the people that is basically left alone without a guy, if you're sort of into that kind of thing. And maybe then you might realize that you are wrong and or misled. Although with that said, I could be wrong about this. Maybe I'm tweaking, maybe I've lost my shits, or maybe I might have a point. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG. It is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.